The United Kingdom has been the shooting location of a number of Muppet productions, perhaps most notably The Muppet Show. Since Henson liked England a lot, it can actually be really hard to remember what wasn't filmed in England. So, which of the following Muppet productions wasn't filmed in England? A. The Great Muppet Caper, B. The Muppet Christmas Carol, C. The Muppets, D. Muppets Most Wanted, or E. None of the above. The correct answer is C, The Muppets. In spite of Jason Segel's attempts to write places he'd like to go into his script so that he can go there, the 2011 film was all shot in the States, mostly in California. And now for something completely different, here's a bit of Fergus Fuzz from Furchester Hotel.
Welcome to the Furchester Hotel.
I'm Fergus Fuzz.
My husband.
My dad.
Elmo's uncle.
I have many jobs at the Furchester.
Oh, Fergus, dear, could you please fix the ice maker in the penguin suite?
Just after I've delivered these bags, unclog the pool, and fix Mr. Doll's chair. Yes, if you need something fixed, I'm your monster.
You fix my favourite chair! Yay!
Wow! I'll bring your luggage to your room. Hey, good morning, Mr. Doll. I'm also the hotel gardener. And the dog walker. Oh, okay. I even entertain our guests.
It's time to bloom. It's time to bloom.
And my dad's always finding ways to improve the hotel.
And don't forget to tell everybody about how good you are at solving problems, Fergus.
Oh yeah, 'cause you know we got lots of problems here.
Lots. Is Uncle Fergus sure this is gonna work?
What could go wrong? Of course, I could never do any of it without the help of my family.
Oh.
So if you need anything during your stay at the Furchester, anything at all, just call my name.
Fergus?
Yes, just like that.
Could you please polish the bowling pins and fix the air conditioning in the polar suite? Oh, and the lift's broken again.
Oh, right away, dear.
My guest today is someone you've probably seen around on Twitter lately, as he's been posting some great behind-the-scenes photos from CBeebies Sesame Street co-production, The Furchester Hotel. He performs one of the main characters on the show, Elmo's uncle Fergus Fuzz. He's also puppeteered in a number of Muppet and Henson productions, including Muppets Most Wanted, The Hoobs, Muppet Treasure Island, and some Jim Henson Creature Shop commercials as well. Andrew James Spooner, thank you for joining us.
Do I call you JD?
Yeah, sure, JD, sounds great.
Okay, great. Hi, JD.
Hi. Do I call you Andrew?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Some people call me J.T. Hanksleben and other weird names like that. You get some odd nicknames in the Muppet fan world. But I'll start by asking you a pretty simple question I'm sure you've gotten a number of times before. So what's the meaning of life? No, never mind. How did you...
For that, I do actually have an answer for that.
Oh, what's that?
It's either 42 if you've read Douglas Adams, or chocolate chip cookies. One or the other.
Right, yeah. I saw 42 coming. I did not see the chocolate chip cookies coming. But what I really want to ask is, how did you get into puppetry?
Well, I guess it stuff like the Muppets just hit at the right time. I was born in the early 70s, 1971. So when all those things like the Muppets, Star Wars, and obviously the movies like Labyrinth and Dark Crystal hit, I was kind of at just the right age to really, get into that kind of stuff. I was kind of grew up in the 70s, a very 70s child. I was into Star Wars, Doctor Who, the Muppets, Star Trek reruns, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, just watching the Muppets on TV and just that kind of burst of colour and music, which was quite unusual for, I guess it wasn't even really children's television back then. It was kind of a family show. They stuck it on late in the afternoon so families could watch it. And there was just nothing else like it. So I was pretty much hooked on the Muppets, at least from that point. I never really thought about being a puppeteer. I guess I was just too young. I didn't quite understand what that was. So I kind of sidelined and I went off and I trained to be an actor. And it was during that process that I kind of realized that I wasn't that comfortable being on stage as myself. And it was at that point I kind of looked back and went, puppetry, that sounds like a really interesting idea. I was interested in it when I was younger. So I left drama school and I wrote a letter to the Jim Henson Creature Shop in Camden. This would have been about 1994, something like that.
Okay.
And it just happened that they were auditioning. It was a pure fluke. And what I didn't know at the time is that they were starting to cast a net out to look at what talent was out there because they were gearing up to do Muppet Treasure Island. So anyway, I wrote this letter, very surprised to get a phone call back saying, yeah, by all means, come in for an audition. So I travelled up to London, went to Camden, and it was kind of like this 2-week Henson boot camp. The first day, they kind of just ploughed through as many auditionees as they could, and then they narrowed it down to, I think, about 20. And then after the first week, I'd managed to survive. And then they narrowed it down to 8. It was kind of like, do you have the X Factor over there? Or pop-up? It was kind of a bit like that. You know, every day they would read a list of names out, and you would just hope that your name got called out. But I managed...
Right.
No, after you, by all means.
Oh, no, I was saying right, because that's something that I've learned from listening to radio interviews, so I just mimic what they do.
Very good.
Yeah.
No, so I survived to the second week, and there was 8 of us, and we had a pretty intense workshop for that last week that was taken by some people that were mostly associated, I guess, with the Creature Shop in Camden, which some of your listeners might know. There was Nigel Plaskett. He's been around for a very long time as a puppeteer. Rob Tigner, who'd done a lot of work with them, including stuff like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and Kevin Clash, who was kind of like the leader of that workshop. And then after that, I kind of, started getting called in for little jobs. And then I guess my first big gig was Muppet Treasure Island, which we shot, I think we started shooting in April 1995.
What was it like working on Muppet Treasure Island?
It was kind of insane.
That's what I'd expect.
Yeah, it was kind of a really hot summer. I do remember that. And I just remember I'd literally just finished drama school, obviously. And I'd just done a tour of Romeo and Juliet, and I'd got a phone call towards the end of that tour saying, would you like to come in for maybe a week on Muppet Treasure Island? And of course it was like, yes, I don't even need to think about it. So I went in for that first week, and it was a week where we shot most of the stuff to do with the Hispaniola in the dock before it departed at the beginning of the film. So it was like Kermit arriving, getting out of the stagecoach, and there was a lot of background action. So I'm in there, but I'm, way at the back. And then that week came to an end, and I thought, well, that was great. A week on a Muppet movie, it doesn't get much better than that. And then as I was leaving on the Friday, the production manager kind of collared me and said, can I just have a quick word? And me being me and being English, my initial reaction is, what have I done? I'm about to get fired or something like that. But he took me to one side and he said, I think we might be able to offer you about 10 weeks work if you would be interested. At which point my brain exploded.
Right, of course. That sounds very exciting.
And it's kind of, I think anybody who's in this business has one job that is a benchmark for everything else that they do in the rest of the career, and Muppet Treasure Island is that for me, because I was there every day for the entire shoot, and then there was a period of about 2 or 3 weeks in the middle of the shoot where Frank Oz came over, because it was just at that period where he was starting to move away from doing stuff with the Muppets, but he came in anyway to do about 2 weeks, which were all the important scenes with Fozzie and Miss Piggy, and they asked me to be his assistant for 2 weeks, and that was just crazy.
Oh my gosh! I mean, that sounds on one hand fun and amazing, but on the other hand intimidating, because it's Frank Oz.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the thing about Frank is, I don't know if he's changed over the years, but when I worked with him, he didn't initially talk to you for like the first few hours, and you'd have your hand in Fozzie's, obviously, his left hand, in Fozzie's glove, and then he would grab your hand with the other hand, and it was kind of like an unspoken rule, which was just like, you're not going to move it. I'm doing everything. And it was like, okay. But, he loosened up. We got to know each other a bit. I mean, I've never, met him face to face since, but that was a really intense couple of weeks where I learned an awful lot.
Yeah. Did that eventually lead to working on other Henson productions? Like, I know you did some commercials with the Creature Shop.
Yeah. We did a series of commercials for, I think the product is called Casualine abroad. It's a fabric softener that has a white bear as a mascot. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, because the Creature Shop was based in Camden, it had really good connections with all the best puppeteer talent in the UK, and I was just starting out, so I didn't get every single job by any means, but occasionally when somebody else wasn't available, they'd give me a call. I remember at one point they rang me. I can't remember what year this was. Maybe you can help me out here, but I got a phone call on a Thursday asking me if I would be interested in going to Australia and working on this thing that they were doing called Farscape for 6 months. But I was going to have to be on the plane in I think 4 days. They gave me a 4-day turnaround. I don't know if somebody else had dropped out or what had happened, but I had to say no. And it was absolutely gutting because there was just no way that I could turn my life around in 4 days and then disappear for 6 months.
Wow. I haven't watched, or I really just haven't researched Farscape enough to know exactly what year that would have been. I think it was late 90s. My brain is telling me late 90s, early noughties, but I honestly couldn't tell you. That sounds about right to me. That's one of those shows that it's on my list. I will research Farscape eventually. So, lately, I've noticed a lot of your work on the Furchester Hotel. And, I mean, can you tell us a little bit about what the Furchester Hotel is and what your character's role is in the show?
Well, the Furchester Hotel is the world's only half-star monster-run hotel. And in terms of its history within Sesame Street, now, we haven't had Sesame Street over here in the UK for, many, many years now. But from what I understand, there was, for a brief period, there was a hotel called the Furry Arms or something like that in Sesame Street.
That's true.
That's right. And it didn't, for whatever reason, it either didn't click or it didn't last for very long for whatever reason. But it was obviously an idea that kind of stuck around in their heads, and they were looking for somebody to do it as a fully fledged concept. And they finally struck up a deal, obviously, with the BBC and CBeebies. And I guess I started hearing rumors about it. I was doing it was the same year we did Muppets Most Wanted. I'd done Muppets Most Wanted, and then off the back of that, I'd gone into a show that the BBC did with the Jim Henson Company called That Puppet Game Show, which ran for about 8 weeks. It was a kind of Saturday evening entertainment show with puppets. And we started hearing these rumors about this big show that was going to be shot up in Media City in Manchester by the BBC and Sesame Street. So I kind of put my feelers out there, and then I got called up to audition. And at this point, we knew very, very little about what it was about. So I went along for the first audition, and then I got a better idea of what it was. It was like, okay, so Cookie and Elmo have come over to England to work in a hotel, and the people that run it are Elmo's uncle and aunt, Fenella and Fergus. But that's all we knew. And then I got a second audition, which is always brilliant but nerve-wracking because you've got to step up your game. And it then became clear that Fergus was going to be Scottish. So I was like, right, okay, I've got to crack open my best Scottish accent. And again, we went through an audition process for about 2 days. We were up in Manchester kind of going in, reading scenes, coming back out, reading different characters. And it was about, after that audition, it was probably about a month, almost 2 months before I got the call saying that they wanted me to play Fergus, which was, I've got to say, it came just before Christmas 2013. I got that call, and it was, that's about the best call you can ever get, I think.
I'd imagine so. Is it ever explained on the show how Cookie Monster got there? because I watched the first episode and I didn't really see how...
I don't think they ever go into any great detail. I think there's a video out there with Cookie and John Oliver where he's talking about getting his passport ready and getting on a plane and what things he should expect that are different in England. But yeah, they never go into that greater detail.
Yeah, I watched the first episode and I'm thinking we're going to see him arrive or something, but no, he and Elmo are just there, employed.
Just there. They're just...
Yeah.
We don't need to explain it. They've come over. That's fine.
Good enough for me.
Yeah.
Now, it looks like you incorporated a form of the shadowmation puppetry process, if I'm saying that right, into Furchester a bit, when you're doing sort of a form of the Bunraku puppetry in which it's all done on green screens and you've got the whole puppet's body there and everyone else is keyed out. Right. And is that pretty different from working on doing regular puppetry, I guess?
We had a little bit of that in there. I mean, there's a few episodes where there is actually quite a bit of full body stuff that we did up against green screen. I think a couple of them have already aired. There's one called Ballroom Dance Weekend where Fergus is running around with polishing the floor, and there's a full body shot in that. And there's another couple which I'll keep quiet about because they haven't aired yet, where we've got some of that in. I mean, I think we tried to do as much of that as we could. The problem with that is putting it in just for the sake of it. I think because it's so complicated and it's so time consuming, there has to be a really good reason for it to be there. Otherwise, I think it just kind of sticks out. So in the case of the Furchester, I think they were very careful about how they deployed that kind of stuff, and it is in there, and I think it just adds it adds to it, I think.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of green screen in this though, which is one of the main differences between Furchester and Sesame Street.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
That kind of changes the look and feel and style of the show quite a bit. Does that make it different in terms of performance when you're working against a green screen?
Oh yeah, I mean the thing about green screen is there's so many technical things that they've got to get right. In fact, I think on my Twitter feed, I've posted a couple of photographs of some of the green screen stuff that we did. I kind of enjoy the green screen thing. I know people that don't, but I enjoy it because it's so technical, because you have to hit certain beats and certain positions, and you can't go outside of those because, something technical is wrong with it. And so you have to go over and over and over again until you get it right. I actually really enjoy that process.
Now, I could be wrong about this, but it seems like the Muppet fan world doesn't really know all that much about Ryan Dillon, because he sort of showed up on the scene pretty recently. When he took on the role of Elmo from Kevin, I'd never heard of him before, but I was immediately wowed by his performance.
He's brilliant, isn't he?
Yeah, so, I mean, I just don't know much about him. What's he like to work with?
He's absolutely brilliant. He's funny. He's about as, he's the best puppeteer you could ever possibly imagine. I mean, I didn't know anything about him when he came on board, when he came over to England, rather, because obviously I associated Elmo with Kevin, and I'd met Kevin in the past. And I hadn't really kept track of what had happened and who had taken over the character. So when he walked in and started performing, it's just astonishing. I mean, it's absolutely spot on. But I think also he's very much making Elmo his now as well. It's not just a carbon copy of what Kevin did. It's very much Ryan's Elmo, and he's just amazing.
Yeah, I've noticed that he has been adapting the character to himself, making it more of his own Elmo, but still all of the little touches and idiosyncrasies, all of the right things that need to be there for it to be Elmo are all still there, and it's very impressive and has been that way from the beginning.
Yeah.
Now, instead of taking on someone else's character, when you're creating a new character, as you did with Fergus, I imagine that's a pretty different beast. So what was it like finding Fergus?
Right. I mean, it's tricky. I by way of answering that, I'll tell you another little story. It was kind of ties into what we've just been talking about. When I first started out, I did a character called, very imaginatively, just called Dog. He was this great big white fluffy dog, and it was a character that I played on and off on television for about 6 or 7 years. It ran. Now, that wasn't originally my character. It was another puppeteer actually, who's worked a lot with Henson's, called Phil Easton. Lovely guy. And I guess part of the reason I got it is because vocally we're quite similar. And so that I could do the most accurate, I'm not going to say impression, but I could get my voice as close to that character voice as pretty much anybody. So I got the job. And of course, originally, when you first start, you're trying to make that kind of bridge between what the original puppeteer was doing and what you're doing as seamless as possible. So I guess the first few shows, maybe the first season that I did, it was very much making sure that all the stuff that the people who watched the show, it was called Tiny and Crew, by the way, all the stuff that the people recognized as being that character was still in place. And it probably wasn't until the second season that I felt like, right, I can probably relax it now slightly and start maybe not trying to get so obsessively close to the voice, because, I do sound slightly different. And gradually over, that 7 years, the character became very much my own. In fact, I kind of watched the character early and I go, there's something about that character. He said he feels slightly older to me than when I finished. He felt slightly younger. So there was a slight, shift in the personality, nothing drastic, and it happened over a long period of time. And you could say the same with, I guess, Steve Whitmire's Kermit. It's Kermit, and there's no denying that, but he's kind of eased in to the character over the years, and I think it's more Steve now.
Certainly.
When it started, he was obviously trying to absolutely nail everything that Jim brought to that character, but he's been able to relax it now over the years and bring more of himself to it. Now with Fergus, it's a completely different proposition, and a lot of it is in the writing. A lot of it is you get a little character breakdown when you take the character on that gives you a little idea of what his character is and how he fits in with everybody else. And the great thing with the Furchester is everybody has kind of a designated, very clear role within the family setup. So Phoebe is the character that Elmo looks up to. He's kind of guiding him through all the adventures that he has in the Furchester. Then you've got Fenella, who's the matriarch of the family. She's in charge of the hotel. She owns the hotel, but she's very, very gregarious and very, I'm going to say hot-tempered. I don't mean tempered, but she's very passionate. And then Fergus is kind of like, I kind of saw him as the uncle that you always wish you'd had. He's kind of the slightly eccentric, slightly befuddled, well-meaning uncle who just wants what's best for everybody and wants to keep everybody pleased. And he's kind of like the odd job man in the hotel. He's the one that, if there's a problem, Fenella will scream out his name first, and he'll turn up with his toolbox and try and solve the problem. Again, it was a process of finding him, and I think that as I watch the episodes now, because they show them out of order from how we shot them, I look at them and I can go, okay, that's an early show. I can tell that's an early show because I haven't quite nailed the eccentricity of the character, or I haven't quite nailed some other aspect of his personality. But certainly, by halfway through and towards the end of the show, I knew exactly who he was. Just this kind of really well-meaning, slightly clueless character. And when I say clueless, I don't mean not intelligent, because in my head he's an inventor. He's the guy that comes up with all these wonderful contraptions to solve problems. I think they've already aired the show over here. I don't know if they've aired it in the States, where he builds a toboggan run through the hotel. Have you seen that one yet?
I personally have not, but that doesn't mean it hasn't been released somewhere.
I think it has. I think it'll probably be on iTunes or the Sesame Street YouTube channel. But anyway, he builds a giant toboggan run through the hotel. So that's the kind of thing he does, and yet he's still slightly clueless about most things.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, big question.
Yeah.
Who's been the most fun character that you've performed in your puppetry career?
Oh, gosh. Now, that is tricky. I know it's going to sound really awful, but I'm going to say Fergus, simply because apart from the character breakdown that I was I was essentially given free rein to do what I wanted, and I don't think once they ever said no, that's not right for that character, and simply because it was such a long production period. I mean, we shot for 3.5 months. And we did 52 episodes back to back, pretty much. It's pretty much the longest time I've worked with a character in one block, if you see what I mean. I played the dog character for lots of, over 7 years, but it was quite broken up. But again, just everything about the Furchester was brilliant. The character, the setup we had in Manchester with all the sets were raised so that we were standing while we were puppeteering rather than scooting around on our bottoms, meant that we had complete freedom of movement. And all that kind of just combined to make it a wonderful experience.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'm searching my brain for transition words. Great.
I enjoyed playing. I've played Animal a couple of times. I played him a few times in Muppet Treasure Island and in Muppets Most Wanted, and I've got a soft spot for Animal, I have to say.
Oh, interesting. I was wondering about Muppets Most Wanted and how you got involved in that, if that was a different type of audition process entirely, or...
I guess that wasn't really... I didn't have to audition. I guess just purely off of the back that I'd done Muppet Treasure Island and been involved in the Creature Shop when it was still open in the UK. I think it closed in about 2004, 2005, meant that when they... obviously made the decision, because it was Disney, to come over and shoot at Pinewood, I think they pretty much just called everybody they had a phone number for just to see if we were even still around, because it had been so many years since, I guess the last Muppet movie to shoot over here before that was Muppet Treasure Island. So I think they came over with a list and then they just started making phone calls. And luckily enough, I got the phone call. So that was great.
Now, you've done some voice acting in addition to the puppetry work, and I was wondering which of the two types of performance you prefer. How do they compare in terms of difficulty or fun or the different elements involved?
I would say that I enjoy them both for different reasons. I think partly the reason why I enjoy doing the voiceover work is because, and growing up in the 70s, we weren't surrounded by media in the way that we are now. I mean, even in comparison to the US in the same period, we had 3 TV stations and that was it. So I listened to a lot of radio as a kid. Radio was kind of my thing because it was on all day, and the BBC used to play repeats of comedy shows that they made back in the 40s, 50s and 60s, and I just fell in love with that kind of stuff. So I was listening to shows like The Goons, which starred Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe and all these wonderful actors, and so I'm kind of fascinated by audio production anyway. And then when I got into puppetry, obviously doing lots of different character voices for different projects, it kind of lends itself to doing voiceover work for stuff like video games. I recently did a video game where I played a donut, and that was they ask you, what do you think the donut will sound like, and you actually have to think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
But all that background in listening to radio kind of feeds into that. Now the difference is that puppetry is more like a straight acting job. You're on camera, you're creating a character, whereas I guess voiceover, here's the thing that I do when I'm recording voiceovers. I tend to stand up. I stand up with the microphone rather than sit down, because I find that if I sit down, my energy goes down, and that kind of comes across in the performance. Whereas if I stand up and gesticulate and jump around, then that energy comes through in the performance, and that's the difference. With a voiceover, everything has to come through the voice. Everything, every little inflection that you can put in, anything to lift that performance and bring it to life.
Now, Newsoids is another show you've been doing, which is pretty different from Furchester, I think.
Yeah.
Just a little. Just
a tiny bit, yeah.
And it actually has a unique puppetry style, unlike anything I've seen before. So how would you explain that show to someone who's not familiar with it at all?
Well, as I said, it's a satirical puppet show, so I guess it's an adult show. It's not a show for kids at all. Taking a pop at celebrity culture, and because it was showing during the general election over here, politicians especially. How would I explain it? Well, it's a completely different approach. In my head, it's actually more like a special effects shoot than a puppetry shoot. It's very precise. The puppets aren't that big, so it's all shot on a fairly tight scale. So even the slightest move that you do is quite big on screen. So it becomes about it's much more precision work in a way than the Furchester. The puppets are much more delicate as well. You can't toss them around too much. They'll break and they're expensive. Each one of those puppets, I think, were about £5,000. So you can't be breaking them. And we did have accidents, arms and legs fell off and that kind of thing. It's going to happen. And then, of course, you've got the other factor that you're not voicing the characters, because all the characters are being voiced by impersonators, and we're miming to a backing track, as it were, on set. So that takes lip sync right out of you're not even thinking about that. And that's actually interesting as a puppeteer, because it becomes about body language more. There's a kind of shift in the way you think. You're acting it out as if you're a mime artist while you're listening to these backing tracks being played. And that's the first time I've ever done that. And that was a process that took me about a week to kind of zero in on when I first started, because I'm so used to learning the dialogue, performing the dialogue, to suddenly be in a situation where sometimes I didn't even know what the dialogue in the sketch was when I was in the pit.
Yeah.
We'd listen to it and then go, oh, right, it's about that. Okay, now I can think about what I'm going to do with the character and stuff like that. But it's rod puppetry. So again, the puppets are a little bit more rigid than obviously the Muppet style puppetry. We would have a puppeteer that would puppeteer the body and the head, and then we would have another puppeteer or maybe two doing the arms. So it becomes very collaborative, and again very difficult, as I said, because it's on such a small scale compared to the stuff that we do on Furchester. So the slightest movement is just blown out of proportion on screen.
Right, yeah. And I think you said the puppets were 3D printed, is that right?
Yeah. And as far as I know, that's a new thing. There's a very similar style of puppetry, as I said, done on a show called Strange Hill High, but they were not 3D printed. These were 3D printed. I think it was partly testing out the technology to see if it was feasible, and also a cost thing. I think it brought the cost down of building the puppets. I mean, they still needed a lot of... Obviously, they didn't just come out of the 3D printer ready. There was a lot of work that went into them afterwards. But yeah, it seemed to work pretty well, I'd say.
That's fascinating. Do you have any suggestions for aspiring puppeteers who'd like to learn the craft and maybe have a main character of their own in a Muppet production someday?
Well, first of all, be patient. It took me 20 years, pretty much, to get my main character on Sesame Street, kind of just plugging away. Advice. Well, in some respects, it's easier, but it's harder, because when I first started out, it was all about, whenever you wanted to contact anybody, it was all about writing letters, sticking them in the snail mail and hoping that somebody would read it. And if you wanted somebody to see a show reel, then you had to copy it from your master VHS copy onto another VHS copy, which you would never, ever see again. And then you had to pay for all of that, stick it in the post, and hope that somebody somewhere would see it. Whereas now, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, things like Twitter and YouTube, and not so much Facebook. I don't use Facebook for professional use. I leave that to friends and family. I use Twitter a lot though, and websites where you can bring all of your stuff together. I would say grab a camera. You can even just a phone. You can buy some pretty good puppets and just practice. I mean, that's essentially what I did when I was first starting out. My dad had an old Betamax video camera, and I had some puppets that I'd grown up with One of them was actually a Rolf the dog puppet that I'd had since I was about 7 years old. And I would kind of just sit there and practice and see if I could copy what I'd seen on the television. And now, of course, with all the video editing that you can get, even on phones these days and tablets, you can create something that looks pretty good and stick it up on the internet and just contact people. It never hurts to write to somebody or email and see what kind of reaction you get. I was kind of not very good at that to begin with. I didn't like bothering people for some reason. And of course, it's taken me a while, but I finally realized that if you don't do anything, then nothing is definitely going to happen. So just try, just get out there, get emailing, and you honestly never know what will happen. If I can make it, and I was a guy growing up in a tiny village in the Kent countryside in the UK, watching the Muppets growing up, if I can do it, then you can, certainly.
Well, now I'm just so inspired. Thank you so much. I'll make that recording my ringtone or something.
Oh, okay.
Well, to start wrapping things up,
Okay.
I'd like to recommend that our listeners check out The Furchester, which can be found on the official Sesame Street YouTube channel, and it's available to download in iTunes. And would you like to tell everybody where they can find you online?
Yeah, I've got a website. It's very, very simple, www.andrewjamesspooner.com. And I'm also, you'll find links for that on my Twitter feed, which is @TheOnlySpoon, @TheOnlySpoon. Sorry, only once. I don't know why I said that twice. That's ridiculous. It's @TheOnlySpoon. I try and keep it interesting. I try and post something at least once or twice a day. Days like today, it's been utterly ridiculous. I've been too busy. I've barely done anything. But most days I will post something of interest, I hope.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. You are probably the most active Twitter user I know of in the Muppet fan community. Perhaps aside from those who are doing the 24/7 news updates and they constantly have to keep up on the busy news days. But
Right.
I'll make sure that I do have a link to the Only Spoon Twitter in the show notes because that's great fun.
Well, I'm trying to figure it out. This whole Twitter thing, I'm such a dinosaur. I'm 44, for heaven's sake. I'm still trying to figure it out. I've really only been concentrating on Twitter now for about, I would say, 5 or 6 months. So, I'm doing okay. I've got almost 1,000 followers. I'm pleased with that.
I certainly would be, yeah. So thank you very, very much for being on the show.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. It's been a real hoot talking to you.
Well, I sure enjoyed chatting with Andrew and learning about the Furchester, so I do suggest you follow @TheOnlySpoon and watch an episode or two of the Furchester on YouTube. For those of you who wish we'd focused more on celebrating America, since it's just a few days after July 4th, and that's usually what Muppet podcasts do this time of year, I think it's important to point out that I did confusingly blur the lines between England and the UK as if they're kind of the same thing, and is there anything more American than total ignorance of other countries? I don't think so. By the way, I've put a link in the show notes to a great video that explains the United Kingdom in relation to England and Great Britain that will really clear things up if you are confused about that, and I'm pretty sure much of the world is. More importantly, the main website for 11 Point Collar, the only podcast dedicated to the work of Jim Henson and the Muppets, is PuppeteHub.com. There you will find every episode of the show, plus videos, articles, and more. You can find us on Facebook at MuppetHub.com/Facebook or by going to Facebook.com/JD11PC. The Twitter feed is @JD11PC, and we're also JD11PC on Tumblr, Instagram, and eBay. Yes, I've started putting up some of my Muppet merch collection on eBay, so if you'd like to expand your Muppet Babies toys collection or check out the other things that I have for sale there, you can go to MuppetHub.com/support for some information about what we're doing on eBay. MuppetHub.com/support is also where you can learn about our Patreon page, which is a great way to help support Muppet Hub. In fact, as one of the perks, people who've pledged $2 a month or more on Patreon, or who recently donated to Muppet Hub directly, got to listen to this episode early. For any questions about that, or any comments on anything going on at Muppet Hub, or if you just want to say hi, please email me at me@MuppetHub.com. me@MuppetHub.com. That's all for this episode, so until next time, waka waka, wubba wubba, and weeba weeba.
you have a slightly different measurement system. It's 32 degrees here.
That's 89.6.
Yeah, that sounds hot.
And he's been posting some great behind-the-scenes photos from BBC's... No, it's not technically BBC. It's one of the...
Do you want to start again?
I do want to start again, yes.